I'm a 32-year-old guy, and until recently, I thought my family had my back. I was wrong. This all started a few weeks ago when I was at the airport, ready to board a flight for an important work trip. It wasn't just any trip. I had spent months preparing for this conference. It was a huge networking opportunity, and if everything went well, it could lead to a major career boost. My bags were packed, my itinerary was set, and I was feeling good. Then my phone rang. It was my mom. The second I picked up, I knew something was wrong. Her voice was panicked, rushed, almost desperate. She told me there was a family emergency and that I needed to come home immediately. No details, no explanation, just that it was urgent, and I needed to change my flight right now. I asked what happened. She dodged the question, just kept saying, "We need you here. It's important." I asked if Dad was okay. If something happened to one of my siblings, she wouldn't say. Just kept repeating that it was serious, and I needed to come home. At this point, my flight was about to start boarding. I had to make a decision fast. I tried calling my dad, no answer. My siblings, same thing. My gut told me something felt off. But this was family. If there really was an emergency, I couldn't just ignore it. So I did what any decent person would do. I canceled my work trip. It wasn't cheap. Changing my flight last minute cost me an extra $800, plus cancellation fees for my hotel and conference registration. My boss was not happy, and I knew this could hurt my career. But I didn't care. If my family needed me, nothing else mattered. I rushed to book a new flight, threw everything back into my suitcase, and made my way to the gate. The whole time I kept checking my phone, hoping anyone, would reply to my texts. Nothing. The anxiety started creeping in. What if something really bad happened? What if I got home and found out someone was in the hospital? Or worse, my mind was racing, but there was nothing I could do except get on that plane. The flight felt like it took forever. The second we landed, I turned my phone back on. Still no messages. That sick feeling in my stomach got worse. I grabbed my bags and got a cab straight to my parents' house, bracing myself for whatever I was about to walk into. But when I got there, the house was dark. No lights, no cars in the driveway. I knocked. No answer. I called my mom, straight to voicemail. Now I was really confused. I sat on the porch, scrolling through my phone, trying to make sense of it. Maybe they were at the hospital. Maybe something happened at my sibling's place. But if it was that serious, why wouldn't anyone tell me what was going on? And then I saw it. A Facebook post from my cousin. A photo of my parents, my siblings, their spouses, and even some extended family, all smiling at a tropical beach resort. I had to blink a few times to make sure I was seeing it right. But there it was. The caption. Best family vacation ever. I just sat there staring at my screen, trying to process what I was looking at. This family emergency, the one that made me cancel my work trip, waste my money, and rush home like an idiot. It was a vacation. A vacation I wasn't invited to. I felt my face getting hot. My hands were shaking. I checked the timestamp. The post had been made hours ago. While I was still on the plane, I tried calling my mom again. Voicemail. I tried my dad. Voicemail. My siblings. Nothing. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I go to a hotel? Call someone else? Go to my aunt's place? I felt completely blindsided. 2 hours passed. I was still sitting there when my phone finally rang. It was my mom. She sounded way too casual, like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't just tricked me into flying across the country for nothing. She asked if I had landed okay. I asked her where she was. Silence. Then she hesitated before saying, "Oh, we're out of town right now." No shit. I asked why she told me there was a family emergency. Why she made me cancel my work trip and waste my money to rush home for something that didn't even exist. She sighed, acting like it was no big deal. Then she said, "We thought you'd be upset if you knew about the trip, so we just told you there was an emergency instead." I almost dropped my phone. They didn't want me to feel left out, so they lied and made me cancel my work trip just to make sure I was left out. I didn't even know what to say. I just hung up. I sat there for a long time staring at my phone. The anger, the disbelief, the sheer audacity of it all, I couldn't wrap my head around it. This wasn't just about the money, or the trip, or even the lie. This was about the fact that my own family didn't even care enough to be honest with me. They didn't want me there, and instead of just saying that, they manipulated me into ruining my own plans just so I wouldn't interfere with theirs. And the worst part, they weren't even sorry. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I was still sitting on my parents' porch, staring at my phone when the anger hit. I opened the family group chat and typed out a message. No passive-aggressive nonsense. No sugarcoating. Just straight to the point. "So you all lied to me. Told me there was an emergency just to get me to cancel my work trip. Waste my money and rush home for nothing. And now I find out you're all on vacation? What the hell is wrong with you?" Sent. Then I waited. And waited. Nothing. No replies from my siblings. No response from my dad. Just silence. The longer it dragged on, the worse it got. They saw my message. The read receipts were there. They just weren't answering. My mom finally responded after an hour. A long-winded text full of excuses. She said she didn't think I'd want to come and that the trip just happened last minute. She claimed they didn't tell me because they figured I'd be busy with work. Busy with work. The same work trip I could have been on if they hadn't lied. I called my dad next. He picked up after a few rings, his voice quieter than usual. He said they didn't mean to hurt me, that they just assumed I wouldn't be free. It wasn't an apology, it was an excuse, like they were doing me a favor by leaving me out. I asked why no one told me the truth instead of staging a fake emergency. He had nothing, just awkward silence. Then he tried to move past it, said it wasn't a big deal and that we should all just let it go. I hung up. At this point, my work trip was gone. The flights were non-refundable, the event had already started, and I had missed out on an opportunity that could have seriously boosted my career. My boss wasn't thrilled about the last-minute cancellation either. I knew this was going to have consequences. Out of frustration, I opened Instagram. Scrolling through my feed, I found more posts, photos, videos, stories. My entire family was having the time of their lives at the resort. Poolside drinks, fancy dinners, boat rides. Someone even uploaded a clip of my brother and his wife at some island tour, laughing like this was the best trip ever. The captions made it worse. Best family vacation ever. So happy to be here with the people who matter most. The people who matter most. That one hit hard. As I kept scrolling, a message popped up from an unexpected source. My aunt. She didn't usually text me, so I was already on edge when I opened it. She said she was confused. She had heard from my parents that I chose not to come on the trip, that I had been invited but decided I was too busy with work. I nearly threw my phone. So not only did they lie to me, but now they were telling everyone else that it was my decision. I called my mom, straight to voicemail, called my dad, straight to voicemail. I sent another text, shorter this time. Tell me why you're telling people I didn't come because I was too busy. You made me cancel my trip. Own up to it. 2 minutes later, my mom called back. Her tone had changed. She wasn't apologizing anymore. She was annoyed. Said I was blowing this out of proportion, that it was just a miscommunication, and that I needed to stop making a big deal out of it. I asked her to explain, point blank, what exactly was the miscommunication? More dodging, more excuses. She was still acting like it wasn't a lie, like I had imagined the entire thing. That's when I snapped. I opened Instagram, found one of the vacation posts, and left a comment. Glad I was forced to change my flight for this emergency. Hope you all are having fun. I didn't even think twice about it. Just posted and closed the app. Within minutes, my phone started blowing up. My siblings were furious. My brother texted first, calling me immature for airing family drama online. My sister followed up saying I was making them look bad. Making them look bad. They lied, stole my time and money, and ditched me. But I was the bad guy for pointing it out? Then my mom sent another text saying they didn't think I'd enjoy the trip, so they didn't even ask if I wanted to come. That made no sense. They didn't even ask if I wanted to come. And if money was an issue, why did they make me waste money on a last-minute flight for nothing? I told them I was done with the excuses, that I wouldn't be speaking to them for a while. Then I muted the group chat. My dad texted me separately later that night. I know what we did was wrong, but I didn't want to argue with your mom about it. I hope you can move past this. No defense, no excuses, just an admission that he knew they were in the wrong. I didn't reply. For the first time in my life, I was starting to realize something. Maybe I was better off without them. I didn't respond to my dad's apology. I didn't text my siblings back. I didn't answer my mom's calls. For the first time in my life, I went completely silent. The group chat kept buzzing, but I ignored it. I didn't want to hear excuses, half-baked apologies, or more attempts at gaslighting. My phone rang at least 5 times the next morning. Mom, then my brother, then mom again. I let every single call go to voicemail. By the time I got back to my apartment, I was already behind on work. My boss wasn't thrilled. Canceling my trip last minute had messed up our schedule, and I had to scramble to catch up on an important project. It wasn't just about proving myself. It was about fixing the damage caused by my family's lie. That night, the messages from my mom started piling up. At first, they were casual, asking how I was, if I had gotten home safely. Then she started doubling down. She texted saying I was being dramatic, that I was overreacting, that I should stop acting like a victim. She told me that family is more important than work, that I was ruining our relationship over a misunderstanding. The next morning I woke up to another text. This one from my cousin. The family group chat had finally responded, though their silence up to now had been deafening. My mother had tried to downplay everything, but some of my relatives weren't buying it. My cousin had called out my parents directly, saying they should own up to lying instead of trying to gaslight me. That's when my brother jumped in, saying I was selfish and making a big deal out of one little mistake. I scrolled through screenshots, reading every message. My mom was playing the victim, saying she just didn't think I'd want to come and that she hates how divided the family has become. Then my dad sent a private text. He admitted they screwed up, said he wished things had gone differently, but then he added that he didn't want to argue with my mom over it. That's when I realized he wasn't going to do anything. He knew what they did was wrong, but instead of standing up for me, he was just going to let her spin whatever story she wanted. I texted him back. One sentence. Then don't expect me to play along. Later that night, I checked Facebook and saw a new post from one of my cousins. Some people don't respect family. Sad to see how selfish people can be. It wasn't subtle. It was aimed at me. I didn't even hesitate. I blocked my mom, my siblings, and that cousin on every social media platform. The next morning, my dad texted me again. He offered to cover the flight costs, but I knew it wasn't about the money. He was about control. This wasn't about the money. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were just trying to shut me up. A few days passed, and I threw myself into work. My boss, to my surprise, gave me a second chance. He wasn't happy about what happened, but he let me prove myself. I worked overtime, fixed my mistakes, and even managed to salvage some of the opportunities I had lost. Meanwhile, my mom wasn't done. She sent me one last text. Sorry if you felt hurt. That was it. Not sorry for lying. Not sorry for manipulating you. Just sorry if you felt hurt. I didn't reply. A few hours later, my cousin called me again. And that's when I got the final confirmation. The trip was planned months ago. They never forgot to invite me. They never assumed I was too busy. They deliberately left me out because they thought I'd say no anyway. I stared at my phone, letting it sink in. They never even wanted me there. They just didn't want to tell me the truth. Instead, they made me cancel my plans, waste my money, and ruin my career opportunity for nothing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. I sat there for a long time before finally making a decision. I wasn't just taking a break from them. I wasn't going to wait for an apology that would never come. I was done. A week passed, no calls, no texts, just silence. Then, early one morning, I woke up to a long message from my mom. At first it looked like an apology. The first few lines talked about how they never wanted to hurt me, how they didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. But the more I read, the more it became clear. This wasn't an apology, it was damage control. She started shifting the blame, saying my dad told her I wouldn't mind missing the trip, that he assumed I was too busy, and it wasn't a big deal. I called my dad later that day. The second I brought it up, he backtracked, said he never meant it that way. He was just trying to keep the peace with mom, that he didn't want to argue about it. I told him that wasn't an excuse. He didn't argue, just sighed and said, I don't know what to tell you. That same afternoon, a new message popped up in the family group chat. This time it was my brother. Dude, you're really still mad about this. Grow up. That was the message. No acknowledgement, no apology, just a classic get over it response. And that's when the guilt tripping started. My mom sent another message, saying I was being childish for holding a grudge over a vacation, that I was ruining the family over one misunderstanding. I didn't reply. A few hours later, my aunt called. She said she understood why I was upset, but that I needed to let it go for the sake of the family, that my mom wasn't handling things well, and I should be the bigger person. I asked her straight up, did she know the vacation was planned months ago? She hesitated. Then quietly, she admitted that yeah, she did. So that was it. Everyone knew. They just thought I'd never find out. I sent another message to my mom. One question, what was the emergency? A few minutes later, she replied, we just really wanted you home. That was it. No excuse, no justification, just that. They never even planned to invite me. They just didn't want me to go on my work trip. I put my phone down and just sat there. This wasn't about the vacation. This was about control. They didn't care about me being left out. They just didn't want me doing my own thing. Meanwhile, work wasn't going great. My boss was still frustrated with me for canceling my trip at the last second. I managed to keep my job, but I had missed a major opportunity that could have led to a promotion. It was a direct consequence of their lie, and they didn't even care. Then my brother took it public. He posted on Facebook, some people just have to make everything about them. No names, no details, but it was obvious who he was talking about. I didn't respond. I just blocked him. Then my dad texted me again. I know this was wrong, but your mom meant well. That was the final straw. I muted my mom's messages. Then, without hesitation, I blocked my brother and anyone else trying to guilt trip me. I sent one last message to my parents. I see where I stand in this family. Don't contact me unless it's something real. And then, silence. No response. No calls. Just silence. For the first time, I wondered if they were actually reflecting or just convincing themselves I was the problem. A few days passed. No messages from my parents. No text from my siblings. Just silence. Then, early one morning, my phone buzzed with a text from my cousin. It was a screenshot from the family group chat. My mom was spinning the story. She told everyone I was overreacting, that I was choosing to stay mad over a misunderstanding. She made it sound like I was the one cutting ties for no reason, like I just woke up one day and decided to hate my family. She never mentioned the fake emergency, never admitted she lied to get me to cancel my work trip. It was all about how she was the victim of my stubbornness. I kept scrolling. My dad was in the chat. He didn't say a word. Then I saw a new message from my younger sister. She backed mom up, saying I was ruining the family over one mistake. She said I needed to move on because holding grudges only makes things worse. I didn't reply. I just locked my phone and went to work. The work fallout lingers. That afternoon, my boss pulled me aside. He reminded me that my canceled trip had real consequences. I had missed out on an opportunity that could have pushed my career forward. I already knew this, but hearing it again just made it worse. The trip I should have gone on, the connections I could have made, the position I might have been offered, all gone. And for what? A lie. The Facebook post that set everything off. That night, my cousin sent me another screenshot. My mom had posted on Facebook. It was one of those vague, manipulative posts. The kind meant to get sympathy without actually saying anything. Family should always come first. Some people forget that. Let go of resentment before it's too late. The comment section was full of sympathy. Relatives were chiming in with heart emojis and comments like sending love and hope things get better. I didn't comment. I didn't react. I just watched. Then my aunt called. She told me my mom was hurting, that she was devastated by my silent treatment, that she just wanted to fix things. I asked her if she knew why I was upset. She hesitated. Then, just like my cousin before her, she admitted the truth. The family didn't forget to invite me. They didn't think I was too busy. They thought I would be boring, that I would complain about the trip, that I wouldn't fit in with the fun vacation they had planned, so they just left me out. Calling out my mom, I grabbed my phone and typed a message to my mom. You didn't forget. You didn't think I'd be busy. You didn't want me there. Just be honest. Her response came fast. It wasn't like that. We just thought you wouldn't have fun with us. That was it. No apology, no accountability. Just another excuse. I didn't reply. The family tries to do damage control. A few hours later, my dad called, same tone, same calm voice. He wanted me to stop making this a big deal. Said I was holding on to anger instead of moving forward. I hung up. Then I went through my social media and started blocking people. First, I blocked my mom on Facebook. Then I left the family group chat. I muted her messages, blocked her on Instagram. The second I did, my brother lost it. Sibling fallout. My cousin sent me another screenshot. This time from the family group chat. My brother was going nuclear. He was furious that I blocked mom, that I was making her cry, that I was ruining everything over a stupid trip. I didn't respond. Instead, I sent one last message before leaving the chat. I'm done being treated like an outsider. Enjoy your perfect families without me. Then, I left the chat, and just like that, my phone went silent. No more guilt-tripping messages. No more fake apologies. I knew they were talking behind my back. I knew they were making me the villain in their story. But for the first time, I didn't care. Weeks passed. My phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts from my parents. Nothing from my brother or sister. The only sign that they even remembered I existed came from their passive-aggressive posts online. My brother shared a meme about family loyalty. My sister posted something about how some people choose to be victims instead of moving on. Neither of them tagged me, but the timing wasn't subtle. Then, out of nowhere, I started getting messages from extended family members. A couple of cousins reached out privately. Some just said they understood why I was upset. One of them straight up admitted that my mom had been telling everyone I chose to cut them off. That I was the one refusing to move past things. It wasn't surprising. She had already lied about the vacation. Of course she was going to lie about this too. But at that point, I wasn't interested in setting the record straight. I had other things to focus on. At work, things finally started turning around. I put in the effort, stayed late, and pushed through every project that had been affected by my last-minute flight cancellation. My boss noticed. After weeks of proving myself again, I was given another chance at the promotion I had missed. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was an opening. One I wouldn't have gotten if I had still been wasting my energy fighting with my family. Then, after weeks of silence, my mom tried to ease her way back in. A simple, generic text. Hope you're doing well. No apology. No mention of what happened. Just a casual message, like nothing had ever gone down. I didn't respond. I knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't reaching out because she was sorry. She was testing the waters, seeing if I would let her back in without her having to own up to anything. Not long after, my dad sent his own message. I wish things had gone differently. I hope you're okay. Not an apology. Not accountability. Just another vague "this is unfortunate" kind of statement. I didn't respond to him either. Then my cousin sent me another screenshot. My brother had sent a dismissive message. He's blowing this way out of proportion. He'll cool off and come back like he always does. Laughing about how I thought I was making some big statement by cutting them off. So not only had they excluded me from the vacation, but now they were making fun of me for being upset about it. I sent my brother a text. So not only did you all leave me out, but now you're making jokes about it behind my back. Got it. His reply came fast. He tried to gaslight me. Said I was taking things too seriously, that they were just jokes, that I was too sensitive. I didn't argue. I didn't explain why he was wrong. I just sent one last message. I'm done with all of you. You made it clear where I stand. Have fun being the perfect families without me. Then I blocked him. An hour later, my mom called me in tears. She was begging me not to cut them off, saying that I was being too harsh, that she never meant for things to go this far. I let her talk, let her go through her whole dramatic speech. Then I gave her my final answer. I'll consider talking to you when you can admit what you did was wrong and actually apologize. Silence. Then a sniffle. Then an attempt at more excuses. I hung up, and just like that, the weight was gone. For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter, maybe even free. For the first time in months, my phone was quiet. No guilt-tripping messages, no fake apologies, no forced family drama, just silence. Weeks passed, and it felt like I was finally getting my life back. Work was going well, my stress levels were lower, and I was actually enjoying my free time instead of dealing with nonsense from my family. Then, out of nowhere, my mom left me a voicemail. Her voice was shaky, emotional. She said the family was falling apart without me, that things weren't the same, and everyone was suffering. I didn't respond. The next day, my dad sent a text. It wasn't dramatic like my mom's message. It was short. He admitted that things weren't fair to me, but then immediately asked if we could just move forward. No acknowledgement of what actually happened. No real apology. Just a request to sweep everything under the rug. I ignored it. A few days later, my brother messaged me, "Yo, what's up?" Like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't mocked me behind my back. Like he hadn't made jokes about me crawling back. I didn't answer. Then my mom escalated things. She texted saying we all needed to meet up in person to fix things. She called it a family meeting, like we were business partners trying to negotiate a deal. I ignored it. Then she dropped the guilt bomb. "Your dad's health hasn't been great. I don't know how much time we have left." I sat with that message for a minute before making one phone call, to my cousin. A few minutes later, I had the truth. My dad was completely fine. No health issues. No emergency. My mom had made it up just to guilt me into seeing them. I didn't reply. Then my aunt messaged me. She told me my mom missed me, that she was really struggling, that I should just forgive and forget so we could be a family again. I didn't respond to her either. Meanwhile, at work, something happened that made everything feel worth it. I got official confirmation of my promotion. The same promotion I almost lost because of my mom's fake family emergency. The same opportunity that had been ripped away when I was forced to change my flight at the last minute. And now, I got it anyway. The moment felt surreal. The months of stress, the lies, the gaslighting, none of it could stop me from moving forward. Then my cousin sent me another screenshot. This time it was from the family chat I wasn't in. My brother had written, "He'll come crawling back eventually. He always does." I grabbed my phone and sent him a single message. "Don't count on it." Then I blocked him. The next day, my mom sent one last manipulation attempt. She said my dad wanted to see me alone. No drama, just a one-on-one conversation. It was a lie. Later that night, my dad secretly messaged me. "I didn't ask for that. Your mom is just desperate." And that was it. I snapped. I sent my mom a final text. "You can't lie your way out of this. Until you own up to what you did, I'm done." No response. No calls. No fake apologies. Just silence. This time, it was my choice. And for the first time in months, I finally felt free. Weeks passed without a single word from my family. No guilt trips. No desperate attempts to drag me back in. Just silence. I thought it was finally over. Then a friend sent me a screenshot. It was a Facebook post from my mom. "Families should never abandon each other. Some people forget who's always been there for them." I stared at it for a moment, already knowing what was coming next. The comment section was a disaster. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were piling on sympathy. Some were talking about how family is everything. Others outright called me selfish and cruel for cutting off the people who raised me. A few messages stood out. "No matter what happened, you only get one family. Kids these days don't know what loyalty is anymore. You need to forgive. Life's too short." It was exactly what my mom wanted. The perfect pity party, designed to make me look like the bad guy. Then something unexpected happened. One of my aunts commented, the same one who had been quietly supporting me behind the scenes. "You lied to him, forced him to cancel his trip, and now you're playing the victim. Own up to what you did." Silence. Then one by one, the sympathy comments started disappearing. I watched in real time as my mom deleted them, trying to clean up the mess. But the damage was already done. The family was split, some still defending her, but others starting to see through the act. Within an hour, my phone buzzed with a new text from my mom. "Can we just talk? This has gone too far." I replied once. "I don't owe you a relationship. I owe myself peace." No response. Then my sister messaged me. She was tired of the drama. She wanted me to just get over it. She said I was dragging this out and that it was affecting the family. I ignored her. Then my cousin sent me another bombshell. My parents had started spreading a new lie, that I chose not to come on the vacation and was now blaming them unfairly. They had rewritten history. Some relatives believed it. Others knew better. A few even cut contact with my parents entirely after seeing how manipulative they were. Then my brother texted, "Stop making mom and dad look bad. You're embarrassing the family." I answered with one final message. "They embarrassed themselves. I just stopped covering for them." Then I blocked him. That night, my mom made one last attempt. She sent a long emotional email begging me to start fresh. I didn't even open it. I just deleted it. Then I used the block button one last time. She on her, my dad, and my sister. And just like that, the drama was over. No more guilt, no more manipulation, just silence. For the first time in years, I chose myself, and I didn't regret it one bit. A year passed, 12 months of silence. No drama, no guilt trips, no forced apologies, just peace. During that time, my life completely changed. My job was better than ever. After months of proving myself, I landed a major promotion. one that put me in a leadership position I never would have gotten if I had still been stuck in family drama. I built a stronger friend circle too, people who genuinely supported me, not just out of obligation but because they actually valued me. For the first time in my life, I surrounded myself with people who didn't make me feel like an outsider. Everything felt lighter. No more constantly checking my phone, dreading the next manipulation attempt. No more walking on eggshells to keep the peace. Then just when I thought I was finally free, my mom tried one last time. A group text popped up from an unknown number. It was an invite, a family get-together, a casual message as if nothing had ever happened. No acknowledgement of the lies, no mention of the fake emergency that cost me my work trip, no recognition of the months of guilt tripping and manipulation. Just a smiling invitation, like I was supposed to magically forget everything and show up like nothing happened. I didn't even think about it. I deleted the message without replying. A few days later, my brother took another shot. Another passive-aggressive meme popped up on his social media. Something about people who think they're better than family. It wasn't subtle. He was still stuck in the same cycle, deflecting, pretending he did nothing wrong, blaming me for setting boundaries. I ignored it. Then my dad secretly reached out. An email this time, short, simple. I wish things were different. That was it. No responsibility, no apology, just a vague, empty message, like he wanted me to fix everything without him ever admitting what happened. I never replied. Then out of nowhere, my cousin messaged me. Apparently, even after a full year, my parents were still pretending they didn't know why I was mad. They told relatives that I just cut them off for no reason. Some people still believed them, but a lot of them didn't. Their reputation was falling apart. Some relatives had stopped inviting them to gatherings. Others had called them out directly, saying they lost respect for them. Then, my brother faced his own setback. He had been trying to land a big job opportunity, one that required strong networking. But word got around that he had a reputation for entitlement, and someone higher up decided to pass on him. I wasn't surprised. He had spent so long being the golden child, expecting everything to fall into his lap. It finally caught up to him, and I felt zero guilt. For so long, they made me believe I was the problem, that I was being too dramatic, that I needed to just let things go. But now, I could see everything clearly. They weren't upset because I was gone. They were upset because they lost control over me, and I wasn't going back. Then, one last desperate move. A friend request from a random burner account. No profile picture, no posts. But the second I saw it, I knew. It was my mom, trying to sneak back in one more time. I instantly blocked it. And with that, it was finally over. A few weeks later, I went on a work trip, one I actually wanted to go on. No last-minute cancellations, no fake emergencies, just me, fully in control of my own life. One night, sitting in my hotel room after a successful meeting, I poured myself a drink and raised my glass to never falling for their bullshit again. And for the first time in a long, long time, I meant it. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and my family has always been a mess. The kind of family where respect is one-sided, obedience is expected, and anything short of full compliance is considered betrayal. My parents have always been the type who think family means control. Their word is law, no questions asked. And my older brother, Ethan, he was their golden child, the perfect son who did everything right. Growing up, there were always rules. What I could wear, who I could be friends with, what I could study. Ethan, on the other hand, had choices. He got to explore his interests, had his mistakes brushed off as learning experiences, and was showered with praise for every minor achievement. Meanwhile, if I so much as questioned anything, I was being difficult or disrespectful. By the time I hit 18, I knew I had to get out. I wanted to go to college, but my parents had their own plans for me. They wanted me to work for the family business, some small company my grandfather started decades ago. Ethan was supposed to take over one day, so my role was clear. I'd be the backup plan, the one who handled the grunt work while he ran the show. I refused. I took out loans, worked part-time, and moved out at 20. It wasn't easy, but I made it work, and for a while there was peace. My parents weren't happy, but they had Ethan, and that was enough. I put my energy into school, graduated, and got a solid job in tech. It felt like I had finally broken free. Then, about 2 years ago, my parents started reaching out more. At first it was casual, checking in on me, asking about work, but I noticed they were fishing for information, subtly bringing up financial difficulties, and how hard it was to keep the family business running. I played along, but I kept my distance. Over time, the calls increased. They started dropping hints about how families should stick together and how I should think about moving back closer to home. I saw it for what it was, a setup. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were testing the waters, seeing if I could be pulled back in. Then came the mandatory family dinner. My parents insisted it was important, that they had big news to share. I had a bad feeling but agreed to go, mostly out of curiosity. I should have known better. The second I sat down, the trap was sprung. They launched into a whole speech about how times are changing and how they needed someone trustworthy to take over the family business. And by someone, they meant me. Ethan had just accepted a high-paying job overseas though. Looking back, I now realize he must have known the business was already in trouble. Instead of telling our parents the truth, he quietly distanced himself, leaving them scrambling for a fallback plan. Me, it wasn't a request. They had already decided. My mother was beaming, My father nodded like it was the most logical thing in the world, and Ethan, he just sat there, looking pleased with himself, like he had just offloaded a burden onto me. I asked the obvious question, why would I throw away my career to take over a business I had never wanted? The guilt tripping started immediately. We did so much for you, family comes first. You owe us this. It was a full-on emotional ambush. Ethan chimed in, acting like I was being unreasonable. He called me selfish for even hesitating, talking about how he had worked hard to set up his own success, and that it was time for me to do my part. That's when it hit me. They had never really respected my choices. In their eyes, my career, my independence, it was all just temporary. The second they needed something, they expected me to drop everything and fall in line. For the first time in years, I pushed back. I told them no, flat out, without hesitation. I wasn't interested, I wasn't going to move back, and I wasn't about to be manipulated into cleaning up their mess. The reaction was instant. My mother looked like I had just spit in her face. My father's expression hardened. Ethan, of course, had this smug little smile like he thought I'd cave under pressure. Then my mother lost it. She started ranting about how I was tearing the family apart, how I was choosing strangers over blood. My father backed her up, saying I was turning my back on everything they had built. Ethan, ever the golden child, just sat back, watching the drama unfold like it was beneath him. I stood up. I told them I wasn't going to argue, that I had made my decision, and that I was leaving. That's when Ethan spoke again. You'll regret this. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. I didn't say another word. I walked out, knowing full well that this wasn't over. My parents had spent years trying to control me. They weren't going to let go that easily. And Ethan, he wasn't done playing his role in this either. I had no idea just how far they were willing to go. After I walked out of that dinner, I knew things were going to get messy, but I didn't expect them to escalate this fast. At first, there was silence. No calls, no messages, nothing. My parents acted like I didn't exist, but they weren't ignoring me, they were regrouping. The first sign of trouble came from my aunt. Out of nowhere, she sent a long message about family unity and how I should reconsider my decision. She made it sound like my parents were devastated, like I had abandoned them in their time of need. Then my uncle chimed in, telling me how much sacrificing for family had helped him in life. I knew exactly what was happening. My parents weren't speaking to me directly, but they were making sure I heard their side through every relative they could get a hold of. The next hit came in the form of an email from my father, a full breakdown of how running the family business would be the best decision for me. He listed out perks like financial stability, long-term security, and most importantly, an inheritance clause that would be revoked if I refused. The message wasn't a plea, it was a warning. Take the deal or be cut off completely. I ignored it. Then Ethan decided to step in. His message was short but filled with that same condescending tone he had at the dinner. According to him, I was running away from responsibility and letting the family down. He talked about how hard he worked to get where he was, how he had always done what was expected of him, and how I was being selfish for not doing the same. I deleted it without replying. That's when things took a turn. My boss called me into his office. He wasn't angry, just confused. Apparently, my parents had called the company pretending to be concerned family members. They asked if I was showing up to work, if I was doing okay mentally, and hinted that I might not be reliable. My boss shut them down immediately, but he wanted to give me a heads up. I reassured him that my family had no influence on my life or career. He understood, but I could tell he was annoyed that they even tried. At first they tried using relatives to convince me. Then came the passive-aggressive messages. But when none of that worked, they escalated. One evening, just as I got home, I heard an urgent pounding on my apartment door. I checked the peephole and saw them standing there looking furious. I didn't open the door. They kept knocking, calling my name, demanding I let them in. Then the yelling started. My mother was saying how I was tearing the family apart. My father was throwing around phrases like duty and responsibility. I told them to leave. They didn't. They stood there for nearly 10 minutes, shouting through the door. My neighbors probably heard everything. Finally, I told them if they didn't leave, I was calling the cops. That got them to back off, but not before my father reminded me of all the things they had done for me. They helped pay for my first year of college before I became independent. In their eyes, that meant I owed them my entire future. I reminded them that I had already paid them back. Every cent. That didn't matter to them. In their minds, their investment in me meant I was supposed to be theirs to control. After they finally left, I thought things would settle down. I was wrong. The next day, my mother started posting cryptic messages on Facebook. Things like, some children forget the sacrifices their parents made. So sad. And family should be everything. It's heartbreaking when some people don't understand that. It didn't take long before distant relatives started reaching out, asking what was going on. I ignored them. Then, Ethan started working behind the scenes. I got messages from two old friends, both saying Ethan had reached out to them, acting like he was worried about me. He was spinning the story, making it sound like I was having some sort of crisis, and had pushed everyone away out of paranoia. I wasn't surprised. This was exactly the kind of move he would pull. If he couldn't convince me directly, he'd try to use the people around me to pressure me instead. Then, out of nowhere, my cousin reached out. Unlike Ethan, he knew exactly what my family was like. He had been through the same pressure before, forced into the family business, guilt-tripped into sacrificing his own goals for the sake of duty. But unlike me, he gave in, and he regretted it. He told me I was doing the right thing, that I should keep standing my ground, that I wasn't alone in this. That was the first bit of real support I had gotten since this all started. Then my parents sent an apology. At least that's what they called it. The message started off with a long explanation of how much they loved me and just wanted what was best for the family. But by the end of it, they made it clear they expected me to come to my senses and do the right thing. It wasn't an apology, it was a last attempt to make me feel guilty. I didn't respond, that should have been the end of it. But then my landlord called me. Someone had called the rental office pretending to be my father. They asked about my lease, wanting to know if I was planning to renew, if I had any late payments, and most disturbingly, if there was a way to get a copy of my key. The receptionist shut them down immediately and flagged the call as suspicious. But now I knew, my parents weren't just trying to pressure me, they were actively trying to sabotage my independence. And that's when I realized I needed to cut them off for good. The moment my landlord told me about the suspicious call from my father, I knew there was only one move left, cutting them off completely. No more arguments, no more explanations, no more giving them the chance to manipulate their way back in. The first thing I did was block them on everything. Phone, email, social media. I didn't just block my parents either. Ethan was on the list, along with any relatives I knew would try to play messenger. Then, I changed my phone number. It was a hassle, but it was the only way to make sure they couldn't keep reaching me. Next, I went to work. After they had already tried calling my job to make me look unreliable, I knew I had to get ahead of anything else they might pull. I scheduled a meeting with my boss in the HR department, explaining that my family had been harassing me and that they might try again. They were understanding, even offering to flag any unknown calls and emails asking about me. Then I went back to my landlord. I told her everything. She updated my file with a strict no information policy. If anyone called asking about me, even claiming to be family, they'd be shut down immediately. She also suggested adding a security system to my apartment. I didn't hesitate. By the end of the day, I had cameras installed and my locks upgraded. And then, silence, at least for the first day. By the next morning, my cousin messaged me. My parents had started reaching out to every relative they could, playing the victims. My mom had already contacted him 3 times, complaining about how I had disrespected them by cutting off contact. My dad wasn't far behind, sending long messages about how family should always come first. Then came the police. I was in the middle of work when I got a knock at my door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw 2 officers standing outside. I already knew what had happened before they even spoke. I opened the door and one of them asked if I was okay. My mother had called in a welfare check, claiming she was concerned for my mental health because I had gone completely silent. I let them in, kept calm, and explained everything. I showed them my texts, my emails, even told them about the harassment at my job. They were understanding and apologized for the inconvenience, but they also warned me if my mother kept doing this, she could be charged with filing a false report. I made sure to document everything. Then Ethan made his move. My cousin sent me screenshots of Ethan messaging multiple relatives, telling them I was acting irrationally and pushing everyone away because of outside influences. He never explained what those influences were, but it was clear what he was trying to do. If he couldn't force me to come back, he'd try to make it seem like I was unstable. It didn't stop there. My cousin also told me about what happened at a recent family gathering. My mom had a full public breakdown, tears, shaking hands, the works. She was crying about how I had abandoned them, how I was tearing the family apart. My dad sat stone-faced, but when someone asked if they had tried to reach out, he responded with, "We've done everything we can." He refuses to listen. Then he started talking about the will. A few days later, I got a voicemail from my father. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He just told me, in the coldest voice possible, that if I didn't fix this soon, I would be removed from their will permanently. I deleted it. The extended family was split. Some relatives told me they understood why I was doing this. Others begged me to just apologize and make peace. I ignored all of them. Then I got an unexpected message. It was from a former employee of my family's business, someone I barely knew, but they had worked for my parents for years. The message was short, just a warning. The business was collapsing. I dug deeper. It turned out the business had been slowly declining for years, something they had worked hard to keep hidden from the family. Their last hope had been passing it off to me, hoping I could turn things around before anyone noticed just how bad it had gotten. Ethan knew too. He had been aware the entire time, and he played along, letting them believe they could just throw the burden onto me while he ran off to his perfect new job overseas. This wasn't about responsibility. This was about desperation. They were drowning, and I was their last lifeline. I sent one final email to my parents. No explanations, no anger, just a simple message. I know the truth. I want no further contact. Do not reach out again. Then I blocked their email, and just like that, it was over. For the first time in years, I felt free. No more guilt tripping, no more manipulation, no more family expecting me to fix their mess. I had chosen myself, and I had no regrets. The silence didn't last long. After I sent that final email and blocked my parents, I thought they'd take the hint and finally let it go. Instead, they switched tactics. If they couldn't guilt trip me directly, they'd destroy my reputation instead. It started with social media. My mother posted vague but obvious messages about selfish children who abandon their family after everything their parents sacrificed for them. Within hours, relatives were sending me screenshots. The comments under her posts were flooded with sympathy. People agreeing that kids these days don't understand loyalty and family should always come first. Then came the direct messages. Aunts, uncles, and even some distant cousins started reaching out. Some genuinely confused, others outright angry. The messages ranged from disappointed lectures to full-on insults about how I was betraying the people who raised me. That was just the beginning. Ethan took things a step further. He started reaching out to mutual friends, spinning the narrative that I was having a breakdown, that I had been manipulated into hating my own family. He made himself look like the responsible older brother, the one trying to help me see reason. Then he messaged me directly. The message was long and carefully worded, pretending to be concerned. He claimed he was worried about me, that I was making a mistake by shutting everyone out. He even suggested we meet in person to talk things through. I ignored him. Hours later, I got an email from my parents. It was exactly what I expected. The first half was all about how heartbroken they were, how they never imagined I would tear the family apart like this, how they only ever wanted what was best for me. The second half was pure manipulation. They painted themselves as victims, making it sound like I had left them destitute, that I was abandoning them when they needed me most. They conveniently left out the part where they had been trying to use me to fix their failing business. I didn't respond. The next morning, my boss called me into his office again. My parents had shown up at my workplace. Security had to escort them out. They had demanded to see me, insisting it was urgent family business. When security refused to let them in, they stood outside the building for nearly an hour. My boss reassured me they wouldn't tolerate this kind of harassment. But the fact that my parents had actually tried to disrupt my job told me everything I needed to know. They weren't going to stop. Meanwhile, Ethan was still working behind the scenes. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that he had started suggesting I had a mental health issue. He wasn't outright saying I was unstable, but he was planting the idea in people's heads, just enough to make them question if maybe, just maybe, I wasn't thinking clearly. Then, finally, something worked in my favor. A childhood friend of mine who had known my family for years got fed up. He called out Ethan and my parents in a group chat, exposing the way they had treated me for years. He didn't hold back, detailing every instance of manipulation, control, and emotional abuse he had witnessed. That's when my cousin stepped in. He leaked messages from Ethan. Screenshots where Ethan admitted the business was going under. Messages where he talked about how my parents were trying to get me to clean up their mess because they had no other option. Proof that this had never been about family or responsibility. It was about money. That's when I decided I was done staying quiet. I wrote a post on social media, laying everything out. The years of control, the guilt tripping, the way they had tried to sabotage my job, and finally, the truth about their failing business. I kept it factual. No emotional outbursts, no insults, just the plain truth. The reaction was instant. My inbox flooded with messages. Some people apologized for believing my parents. Others told me they had always suspected something was off. A few extended relatives quietly supported me, but most of them stayed silent, not wanting to get involved. Then I heard from my cousin again. Apparently, after my mother saw the post, she tried to play the victim at a family gathering. She kept saying how she never thought I would do this to her, while my father sat quietly, watching people's reactions. My father was furious, demanding I take the post down. I didn't. Ethan called me. I picked up, just to hear what he had to say. The second I answered, he exploded. He accused me of disrespecting the family, of making them look bad, of crossing a line. He ended with a final warning: I would never be welcomed back. I hung up. Then I blocked him. I blocked my parents. I blocked every relative still trying to guilt trip me. I cut off every single person who was feeding into the drama. The peace was instant. For the first time, I knew I was completely free. A few weeks after I went completely no contact, I got an email that confirmed everything I had suspected. It was from a former employee of my family's business. Someone I barely remembered, but they had worked there for years. The message was short: it's over. They filed for bankruptcy. I checked online, and there it was, a formal bankruptcy filing. The business that my parents had spent decades running, the same one they had tried to manipulate me into saving, was officially gone. Then the fallout began. At first, my parents tried to keep it quiet, pretending like nothing had happened, but word got out fast. Extended family started hearing about the bankruptcy, and suddenly, all those relatives who had been calling me selfish and ungrateful weren't so sure anymore. Ethan wasted no time trying to spin the situation. He made a long LinkedIn post about resilience in the face of setbacks, talking about how difficult times build character and how real leaders adapt and grow from adversity. He framed it like he had made a difficult but strategic choice to move forward in his career, completely ignoring the fact that he had abandoned the family business before it collapsed. The comments were filled with his professional contacts offering empty words of encouragement, but the people who knew the real story, they weren't buying it. Then my mother reached out again. This time it wasn't manipulation disguised as concern. It was a straight-up demand. This is your last chance to fix things. That was the whole message. No guilt tripping, no pretending. Just a final attempt to pressure me into bailing them out. I ignored it. Then, silence. My father, always the prideful one, stopped reaching out entirely. No more emails, no more messages through relatives. Nothing. That was the real confirmation that they had finally lost control. Then Ethan's perfect life started to crack. With the family business gone, Ethan found himself in unfamiliar territory. He still had his overseas job, but without the cushion of our parents' financial support, he realized how fragile his success had been. He wasn't broke yet, but the struggle to maintain the life he was used to had begun. That's when the extended family really turned on them. For years, my parents had spun this image of being successful, responsible, and well off. They had always acted like they were above everyone else, like their way was the right way. But now, the truth was out. The manipulation, the financial instability, the way they had tried to throw everything onto me. People finally saw them for who they really were. I found out through my cousin that my parents had mortgaged everything to keep the business afloat. They had poured all their savings into trying to save it. Now that it was gone, they were left with nothing. The house was the first thing to go. They had no choice but to sell it. The same house where they had spent years looking down on me, making me feel like I wasn't good enough, now belonged to someone else. They moved into a much smaller place. Nothing fancy, just a basic apartment in a cheaper part of town. A far cry from the lifestyle they had always flaunted. Ethan, meanwhile, was in full panic mode. He started reaching out to distant relatives, trying to get financial help. But people weren't interested in bailing him out. He had spent years acting like he was better than everyone, looking down on anyone who didn't fit his version of success. Now, when he actually needed help, nobody was lining up to save him. Then, the fake apology came. My mother sent another message. This time, it wasn't a demand. It was framed as a heartfelt plea. "We just want to start fresh as a family." I didn't respond. Later, my cousin told me that behind closed doors, Ethan had admitted they had been wrong. He had even said that maybe, just maybe, I had made the right choice by walking away. But he would never say it to my face. His pride wouldn't let him. And that's when I knew. There was no going back. No fixing this, no repairing something that had been broken for years. I had finally completely escaped. For the first time, I felt real peace. No more phone calls. No more manipulation. No more guilt. I focused on my career, on my friendships, on actually living my life without being dragged down by their expectations. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next guilt trip or ambush. I had chosen myself, and I never regretted it. A few months passed in complete silence. No messages, no unwanted calls, no unexpected drama. After years of walking on eggshells around my family, I was finally free. Then Ethan emailed me. The subject line was simple: a path forward. The email itself was oddly formal. No passive-aggressive comments, no guilt tripping. Just carefully chosen words like "I acknowledge our past difficulties, and I hope we can find a way to move forward as brothers." He wanted to talk and reconnect. Something felt off. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I reached out to my cousin, the only one still in contact with Ethan. If there was any hidden motive behind the email, he'd know. And of course there was. Ethan wasn't reaching out because he suddenly cared about fixing our relationship. He was struggling financially, badly. With the family business gone and our parents in no position to support him, he was scrambling for stability. He had been job hunting for months, but wasn't having much luck. His safety net was gone. That email wasn't about reconnecting. It was a calculated attempt to see if I was still family enough to bail him out. I sent him a simple one-word response. No. The reply came minutes later. The formal tone was gone. The careful wording, gone. Instead, it was a rant. Long paragraphs of insults, calling me spiteful, immature, selfish. He accused me of abandoning my family in their time of need and turning my back on my own blood. He acted as if I had personally ruined his life, as if I was the reason he was struggling now. I didn't bother replying. I just blocked him again. Not long after, my mother tried one last time, a long-winded text about forgiveness and letting go of the past. How family is forever. How I should be the bigger person and come back home where I belonged. I ignored it. Then my father finally broke his silence. Unlike Ethan's email or my mother's emotional messages, his was short, direct, cold. "You're no longer part of this family." I shrugged and deleted it. There was no sadness, no guilt, just relief. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was carrying their expectations on my back. There was no more weight holding me down. I could live my life on my terms, without their constant interference. I started traveling more, taking time off from work to explore places I had always wanted to see. I built deeper friendships, surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me, not because of what I could do for them, but because of who I was, and I never looked back. Through the grapevine, I still heard bits and pieces about them. Ethan was still struggling, jumping from one job to another, never quite finding his footing. The golden child who had always been told he was destined for success now had to fend for himself, and he wasn't handling it well. My parents were barely scraping by. The house was gone, their finances drained. The reputation they had spent years building, the one they used to control and manipulate people, was shattered. And yet, they never changed. They never once admitted they had been wrong. Some people never do, and I was grateful I had the strength to walk away when I did. Months passed with nothing but silence. No emails, no calls, no messages through relatives. It was the longest stretch of peace I'd had in years. Then, out of nowhere, a text came in from an unknown number. It was my mother. The message was dramatic, almost desperate. She begged me to call her, saying that my father was sick and that the family needed to be together now more than ever. There were no details, just urgency, as if something terrible had happened. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached out to my cousin, the only person I still trusted to tell me the truth. Within minutes, he confirmed what I suspected. There was no emergency. My father was fine. He wasn't in the hospital, wasn't sick, wasn't dying. It was just another attempt to manipulate me into breaking no contact. I blocked the number. Then, Ethan made his next move. An old friend messaged me, asking if everything was okay. Apparently, Ethan had reached out to him, acting concerned, trying to check in on me. He was fishing for information, where I lived, if I was still at the same job, if I had mentioned anything about our parents. It didn't take long to figure out why. Through mutual acquaintances, I found out that Ethan was struggling badly. His job search had gone nowhere. Every opportunity he thought he had lined up fell through. Turns out he had relied on family connections for everything, and now that those were gone, he was floundering. He had never actually built a career for himself, just coasted on the reputation my parents had built. And now there was nothing left to coast on. Months passed without a word, and for a while I thought they had finally accepted my decision. But then, a carefully worded message arrived from my mother, the latest in a series of supposed apologies that always ended with demands. That they understood why I had distanced myself and wanted to repair the relationship. It was the first time she had ever acknowledged that they had done anything wrong. But my cousin warned me again. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were more desperate than ever. Their financial situation had gotten worse. They were months away from losing their home. Ethan was pressuring them to get me involved because, to him, I was still the only way out. Then the social media posts started. My mother suddenly began posting about second chances and forgiving those who have wronged you. She never mentioned me by name, but the message was clear. She was trying to set the stage for a public sympathy campaign. She wanted people to see her as the victim, to make it seem like she was the one offering an olive branch, and I was the one refusing it. I didn't engage. Then Ethan tried one last time. A direct message, casual at first. He suggested we meet up for coffee to clear the air. No big speeches, no guilt trips, just an offer to talk. I didn't hesitate. I declined. Later, a relative finally confirmed the full story. My parents weren't just struggling, they were in full-blown panic mode. The house was on the line. Bills were stacking up. Ethan, once the golden child, was now just another person struggling to find work. The money had dried up, and so had their options. And I was their last one. That was the moment I knew, without a single doubt, that I had made the right decision to walk away. I blocked my mother's new number. I blocked Ethan. Again, I cut off every remaining avenue they had to reach me. Then, I booked a trip I had been putting off for years. I left, knowing that for the first time in my life, I was completely free. A year passed since I cut my family off completely. No calls, no messages, no guilt trips, just silence. And for the first time in my life, that silence felt like peace. Without the constant weight of their expectations, I thrived. My career took off. I got promoted twice in less than a year, something I never would have achieved if I had been stuck dealing with their drama. The freedom to focus on myself, my goals, and my happiness changed everything. Meanwhile, my parents' situation kept getting worse. Through mutual contacts, I heard they had finally lost the house. The financial hole they had been digging for years had finally caught up to them. They were forced to sell, and with the way the market had crashed around them, they barely walked away with anything. They moved into a small apartment, a far cry from the life they had once flaunted. And Ethan, the golden child, the one who had always been handed everything, was now just another guy with a regular corporate job. Without my parents bankrolling his lifestyle, he had no choice but to take what he could get, and he hated it. He had never planned for this, never thought he'd have to build something on his own. He had been raised to believe that success was guaranteed for him, that the world would always make space for him because that's how it had always been. But reality had a different plan. That didn't stop him from trying to salvage his image. On social media, he rebranded himself as a self-made man, posting long-winded motivational speeches about overcoming adversity and learning from setbacks. He conveniently left out the part where he had been financially supported by my parents his entire life. He never mentioned the failed family business or how he had tried to manipulate me into fixing it. It didn't take long for people to see through it. Extended family, the same ones who had once called me selfish for walking away, had changed their tune. The full truth had finally come out, how my parents had lied about the business, how they had tried to trap me into saving it, how Ethan had played along with their manipulation until the last possible second. People stopped taking their side. That didn't stop my mother from making passive-aggressive posts about ungrateful children and betrayal. The same routine she had always used, hoping for sympathy. But it wasn't the same anymore. The comments under her posts weren't filled with the usual validation. People were either ignoring them or gently telling her to move on. I didn't care. For the first time, I felt no anger, no frustration, just indifference. Their attempts to get my attention didn't bother me anymore because they no longer had any power over me. Then out of nowhere, I got an email from them. No apologies, no acknowledgement of everything that had happened, just a casual, almost cheerful message asking if I was coming for the holidays, as if nothing had happened. As if we were just a normal family that had lost touch for a little while. I didn't even bother responding. I just deleted it. I had built a new life, a better one. I had surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me, not because of what I could do for them, but because they actually valued me as a person. I had built friendships that felt more like family than my actual relatives ever had, and I didn't feel guilty. Not anymore. Looking back, I realized the biggest lesson I had learned. Sometimes walking away isn't about winning or losing. It's about freeing yourself from a game you never wanted to play in the first place. I wished them well, but I would never let them control me again. That chapter of my life was closed, and for the first time I was truly free. Just when I thought it was finally over, I got a message from a distant cousin. At first, I almost ignored it. By now, I had stopped caring about whatever drama my parents or Ethan were stirring up. But something about the wording caught my attention. I thought you should know what they're trying now. I opened the message. Apparently my parents had been reaching out to other relatives, not just to complain about me, but to find a way to legally force me to help them. I read that part twice. Legally, I kept scrolling. My cousin explained that my parents had briefly consulted a lawyer to see if they could claim family responsibility laws to demand financial support from me. They were that desperate. I wasn't even surprised. The only reason I hadn't heard about it sooner was because they were keeping it quiet, probably to avoid looking bad if it didn't work. They had gone to a lawyer, hoping they could make a case that I was obligated to help them financially. But here's the thing, in my state there are no laws forcing adult children to support their parents unless there's a legal contract in place. And I had never signed anything. They had no case. Apparently this whole idea was Ethan's. He had been the one pushing them to look into legal options, thinking he could force me into helping just like they had manipulated me my whole life. The best part? The lawyer shut them down immediately. From what my cousin heard, the lawyer didn't even entertain the idea for long. The second they explained the situation, he told them straight up. They had zero legal standing. No contracts, no agreements, no obligation. Nothing. And just like that, they dropped it. But they didn't let it go quietly. My mother had a full breakdown on Facebook. This time there were no vague posts, no cryptic messages, just a long dramatic rant about how some children are heartless and karma will come for them. She made it sound like she had done everything for me, only for me to turn my back on her in her time of need. The response wasn't what she expected. At this point, most of the extended family had distanced themselves from my parents. People were tired of the constant manipulation, the lies, the theatrics. Instead of sympathy, the comments were full of people telling her to move on or questioning why she and my father hadn't planned better for their future. She deleted the post a few days later. Then Ethan finally gave up. After realizing there was no way to force me to help, he stopped reaching out. No more fake concern. No more fishing for information through mutual friends. No more backhanded attempts to guilt trip me. It was over. But my father had one last move left. A voicemail. It was short, cold. If you ever decide to be a son again, you know where to find us. I laughed. Then I deleted it. That was it. The last desperate attempt. The last string they had tried to pull. And it didn't work. For the first time, I knew they had finally given up. I felt nothing. No sadness. No guilt. Just relief. I never checked on them again. Never asked about their situation. Never let myself get pulled into their drama. I moved forward with my life. My career thrived. My friendships grew stronger, and I built the life I had always wanted, one that was truly mine. And that's when I realized the biggest lesson of all, family isn't about blood. It's about love, respect, and mutual support. Walking away hadn't been easy, but it had saved my future. And sometimes, the best way to win is to remove yourself from the game entirely.